Howdy there, my name's Zane Lewis, and with a diverse history of Indians, gunfighters, miners, farmers, and tourists, Colorado's incredible history spans across thousands of years, and in this documentary, we will cover the Centennial State's story from the first ancestral Puebloans to the gold rush of the 19th century to present day, uncovering the vibrant tale of America's most beautiful state. Although the terrain in which the state resides in has existed since the beginning of time, Colorado's human story gets its start some 1400 years ago in AD 550 when the nomadic ancestral Puebloans moved into the Four Corners region. A large group of them settled in what is now Mesa Verde, building an incredible cliffside dwelling and learning vital tricks such as making bows and arrows. In 750 AD, they constructed mud houses above ground, and by AD 1000, they had learned stonemasonry. During the Classic period around 1100 AD, their population blossomed into a civilization of thousands of people, but around 1200, they vanished. Was it because of war, religious reasons, or climate change? Unfortunately, we do not have the answer to that, and their ruins wouldn't be discovered until cowboys came by in the 1800s. But the ancestral Puebloans would hardly be the last Native Americans to make Colorado their home. In 1598, the first Europeans to explore the state, those being the Spanish conquistadors led by Juan de Onate, founded their first settlement, New Mexico, which encompassed part of what would become the Centennial State. The Spanish heavily explored the Great Plains part of the state, however largely ignored the western part due to the fact that it was occupied by Ute Indians who had moved in sometime before 1600. Although they established decent trading conditions with other native tribes, the Spaniards and Utes would duel each other from time to time. However, by the 1700s, the Spanish suspected there were significant mineral deposits in the San Juans, a range of the Rocky Mountains, which was controlled by the Utes. In the 1750s, New Mexico's governor Tomas Velez Cachupin successfully made peace with them, paving the way for the Spanish to search for silver beyond the Colorado River. The first party to go was led by an explorer named Juan Antonio Maria de Rivera in July of 1765. Traveling from Abiquiu in the present-day state of New Mexico, they traveled to Chimney Rock, just west of modern-day Pagosa Springs. Following a path that would become known as the Old Spanish Trail, they named the Dolores, Navajo, San Juan, Piedra, Pinos, Florida, and Animas rivers. Rivera's team prospected the mountains near the La Plata River, finding some gold, but not the pure form they desired. This would ultimately end their first expedition. However, it was not a failure, as the group had made friends with some of the local Indians who told them to return in the cooler weather of the fall. The Spaniards would launch numerous more expeditions into the Colorado wilderness. However, they had limited success in striking it rich. In 1803, the new country of the United States of America, spearheaded by President Thomas Jefferson, purchased the Louisiana Territory from France, opening up American expedition of part of Colorado. However, part of America's territorial claim along the eastern Rocky Mountains was disputed by Spain, and when American expeditioners came to explore the area, the Spaniards arrested them and refused to release some of them for years. In 1819, Spain and the US signed the Adam-Onis Treaty, where America ceded its land claims west of the Arkansas River, and 2 years later, when Mexico gained its independence, the new government agreed upon the same boundary as Spain had established. Between 1846 to 48, the US invaded Mexico and forced them to cede the American West, placing Colorado firmly under American control. At this point, Colorado was divided between the Utah, New Mexico, Kansas, and Nebraska territories. Most settlers avoided the rugged terrain of the Rockies, however, and went to Oregon and California instead. In June of 1850, a man named Lewis Ralston discovered gold in Clear Creek Canyon, close to the modern-day Eisenhower Tunnel. 8 years later, members of his party created Aurora, which would set off the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, when over 100,000 people would flock to the state to try and strike it rich, and 3 years later in 1861, the territory of Colorado was created. At this time, the American Civil War was raging between the northern and southern states, and the Republican-controlled Congress desperately wanted Colorado to achieve statehood so they could get 2 new senators and 3 more electoral college votes to shore up President Abraham Lincoln in the highly contentious 1864 presidential election. At the same time that America was fighting the Civil War, Union soldiers were deployed to Colorado between 1863 to 65 to fight the Colorado War against an alliance of Indian tribes which included the Kiowa, Comanche, Arapaho, Brule, and Lakota tribes. During this war, the Army massacred hundreds of Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians at the Sand Creek Massacre in November of 1864, and numerous congressional hearings would result, although the general who committed the crime would not be charged for it. In March of 1875, Congress told Colorado what the requirements would be in order to achieve statehood, and in August of 1876, President President Ulysses S. Grant granted Colorado the status of being the 38th state in the country. The Centennial State became the first to grant voting rights to women through a ballot referendum in November of 1893, although Wyoming's legislature had done so earlier that century. While mining had begun a decade earlier, it was around this time that the Colorado silver boom came about thanks to Congress raising the mineral's price, and silver was discovered at the town of Leadville, which would become one of the richest mining districts anywhere in the world. All across the western slope, mines would spring up, with towns like Georgetown, Breckenridge, Silverton, Ouray, and Telluride rising to prominence. To support the mines, hundreds of railroads sprang up all across the state, and while many were short-lived, some of them, like the Denver and Rio Grande Western and Colorado and Southern lines, survived for over 100 years and have become etched into the memories of railroad enthusiasts all across the world. Miners worked long and arduous days hundreds of feet below ground, with accidents being frequent, and their life expectancies were extremely low. In order to get better working conditions and pay, many unionized, which led to multiple armed and violent clashes, with the first notable case being the WFM strike in Leadville. Chaos broke out, and Republican Governor Frederick Pitkin deployed the National Guard after strikebreakers attacked and damaged the Coronado mine, and eventually the strikers ran out of money to continue their negotiations, resulting in them being sent back to $3 a day pay. The San Juan Mountains would compete with the Leadville district for the richest area in the state, with dozens of towns popping up outside of Telluride and Silverton, such as Tomboy, which at more than 11,000 feet of elevation became the highest elevation ghost town in the United States. Additionally, Telluride was an important stop along the Rio Grande Southern Railroad, a small narrow gauge line that ran through the best mountains in the West, which I covered in the documentaries linked in the description and top right hand corner. A few miles outside of Silverton, towns like Chattanooga, Gladstone, Eureka, and Animas Forks sprang up, and the free railroads that serviced them would collectively become known as the Rainbow Route, complemented by some of the most beautiful scenery anywhere in the world. Additionally, the DNRGW constructed a line between Durango and Silverton in 1882, blasting out part of a mountain to do so, connecting the region to the outside world. Coal soon joined other minerals in being a valuable mineable commodity in the state. However, between 1884 to 1914, over 1,700 coal miners perished in their toils, which set up the Colorado Coalfield Wars in 1913. In 1893, President Grover Cleveland repealed the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, which caused the minerals prices to fall dramatically, forcing thousands of silver mines to close overnight, and many towns instantly became ghost towns. Colorado's economy struggled to recover. Due to this, the state became heavily populist, with over 84% of its voters backing Democrat William Jennings Bryan in the 1896 presidential election, who openly attacked the gold standard. Colorado's mining industry would not adequately recover until the panic ended in 1897, and by then, it had become less dependent on it, with manufacturing and agriculture becoming larger shares of the economy. Yet another labor union battle emerged in 1894 when the Western Federation of Miners successfully struck for 5 months in Cripple Creek, forcing the mine owners to back off, grant a higher daily pay, and an 8-hour workday. This is the only time in American history where the state militia was deployed on the side of the strikers, and all 4 of the miners who were convicted of crimes were pardoned by the state's populist governor. In 1903, the Colorado labor wars began. However, these strikes would take place all across the state, in Colorado City, Durango, Denver, Telluride, Cripple Creek, and Idaho Springs. These strikes became the most violent in the state's history up until that point, and Republican Governor James Peabody declared martial law and deployed the National Guard to crush the strike. With bombings and killings at multiple mines and the Independence train station, the state's National Guard deported hundreds of strikers in Cripple Creek and arrested journalists who wrote editorials criticizing the mine owners. This episode would result in the creation of a widely spread poster in Telluride questioning if Colorado was actually an American state. In 1903, the Colorado Coalfield War broke out, and it would replace the 1903 War as the bloodiest labor war in American history. Organized by the United Mine Workers of America, the strikers fought to force the Colorado Fuel and Iron Steel Company, owned by John Davison Rockefeller, to raise their pay and improve dangerous working conditions. Tens of thousands of miners were evicted from their housing, and the fighting centered around Los Animas and Huerfano counties, 2 important coal mining districts. High tensions would ultimately result in the Ludlow Massacre, when soldiers from the CF&I Company, along with Colorado National Guardsmen, attacked a large miners' tent camp at the site and killed 21 men, women, and children. In retaliation, the strikers attacked anti-union establishments, and fighting between them and the state government would continue to intensify until President Woodrow Wilson deployed federal troops to disarm the two sides on April 29, 1914. An estimated 69 to 199 people were killed during the saga, and the Union's unconditional surrender to the mining companies was a big big defeat for President Wilson, who had attempted to negotiate a pro-union settlement. With the outbreak of the First World War and America's eventual entry, ore and food prices skyrocketed, which boosted Colorado's economy to new heights, although the federal government took over numerous railroads in the state until the war finally ended in November of 1918. The Centennial State's economy was hit hard by the short post-war depression between 1920 to 21, as the demand for ores dropped, and it would take longer for it to experience the wonders of the roaring 20s. During the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan significantly expanded its operations in the state, including taking over numerous prominent political positions, such as the Denver City mayoralship. Multiple Klansmen would get arrested over tax evasion and other criminal activities, which resulted in the Klan losing the majority of its influence by the end of the decade. In 1927, yet another coal strike, this one over the execution of 2 Italian immigrants who had been convicted of murder, took place that would last into the next year, which would result in the closure of all the state's coal mines. Additionally, Colorado's first Columbine massacre occurred that year, when 6 miners were killed and 20 injured by the Colorado State Militia. Although it would take another 5 years, federal legislation in 1933 eventually allowed miners to join unions without fear of retaliation from their bosses. With the onset of the Great Depression in 1929, Colorado's economy crashed, with many homeless in Denver sleeping in abandoned cars and the state's unemployment rate reaching 30%. Additionally, the eastern plains of Colorado became a part of the Dust Bowl, suffering severe dust storms across them, devastating the agricultural community. When Franklin Roosevelt took office in March of 1933, he implemented dozens of New Deal programs that aimed to boost the nation's economy, and many of their programs took place in Colorado, with the government funding the creation of projects such as the Red Rocks Amphitheater, hospitals, schools, and more, which inevitably resulted in towns springing up around them. Ultimately, there would be more than 5,000 New Deal projects across the state. Despite these programs, the Great Depression wouldn't end until America joined World War II after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, which spurred America's industrial might into action, with dozens of factories springing up in Colorado, ending its drastically high unemployment rate. More than 50,000 Coloradans enlisted to serve in the military during the war. The U.S. Army built Camp Hale along Tennessee Pass to train soldiers in skiing, rock climbing, and other harsh winter operations. It was also a POW camp, housing a few hundred German soldiers, a few of whom unsuccessfully tried to escape back to Germany. After the CIA secretly trained Tibetans at the camp in 1963, the camp was shut down in 1965 and turned over to the Forest Service. In October of 2022, after being urged by Colorado's congressional delegation, President Joe Biden designated the camp as a National Historic Monument. Mining once again picked up during the war. However, the government's new mineral focus was on metals such as molybdenum and uranium, the first of which was used in steel alloy, while the second was used in the Manhattan Project, which was a secret government project that successfully developed the world's first atomic bomb, headed by Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, who you might have watched a movie about last year. Now, that isn't to say that Coloradans didn't come to despise the wartime rations that the government imposed on foods and other necessary commodities. However, many planted victory gardens to lessen the burden of those restrictions. After the war, Colorado experienced a major influx of newcomers, resulting in the ski industry expanding drastically. As with other outdoor activities, and in the 1950s, it became important for high-tech manufacturing. But with the accelerating use of automobiles and trucks, the railroads of Colorado began to decline, and many lines began switching from steam engines to diesel trains, with some, such as the Rio Grande Southern, being abandoned altogether. Additionally, without the wartime mineral need, many mines closed their doors for good. The state's economy grew rapidly over the rest of the century, and tourism would become one of its biggest parts in the 1960s, which helped keep the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad from scrapping its famous Silverton branch, which had been flailing without anything to ship. In 1967, Colorado became the first state in the nation to legalize liberalized abortion, which remains in effect today. In 1970, President Richard Nixon signed an executive order creating the Environmental Protection Act, which is particularly influential in Colorado because it cleans up the waste from the thousands of abandoned mines throughout its boundaries. In 1972, Colorado became the first place in the world to reject hosting the Winter Olympics, and to date, the only one. Thus, the 1976 games were relocated to Austria. This may surprise many of you, but in the 1980s, despite the fact that America's economy was booming nationwide under President Ronald Reagan, Colorado suffered 2 recessions, and the decade is referred to as the second worst economic period in its history, second only to the Great Depression, with its unemployment rate averaging 6.5%. This was largely due to a series of bank struggles that resulted with them laying off much of their workforce, and as a result, in 1986, for the first time in 20 years, more people moved out of Colorado than moved in. The energy, manufacturing, manufacturing, and airline sectors had impressive layoffs as well. The 90s would see a big reversal of the state's economic conditions, with hundreds of thousands moving to Colorado, creating a suburban boom. Inflation and unemployment were low, with almost 500,000 jobs being added, but the 90s wouldn't be all boom and glory. In April of 1999, 2 armed gunmen entered Columbine High School at the town of the same name and murdered 12 students and 1 teacher, injuring over 20 others. After executing the students, they committed suicide in the library. This was the deadliest school shooting in American history until the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012, and it remains the worst in Colorado's history. In December of 2007, the global market crashed, and America's economy saw negative GDP growth, skyrocketing unemployment, dropping birth rates, and rising suicides in the worst recession since the Great Depression. Colorado Springs suffered severe repercussions, being forced to drastically cut its budget. For 2 straight years, Colorado lost jobs and its economy sank. The state's construction force was decimated, and a housing shortage settled in. Denver was able to bounce back quicker than the rest of the country. However, it would take until 2011 to 16 for America to fully regain the wealth it had previously lost. In 2012, Colorado became the first state in the union to legalize recreational weed. Over 55% of voters voted for the decriminalization of the drug in the ballot referendum, and legal sales began in January of 2014. Despite this, over 170 municipalities in Colorado continue to ban the sale of the drug in some shape or form. In 2015, the EPA was performing reclamation work at the abandoned Gold King mine, one of the largest mines in the area surrounding the town of Silverton in the San Juan Mountains, and accidentally released toxic wastewater into the Animas River. This accident contaminated the water, even affecting Utah and New Mexico, which has sparked remediation efforts that continue to this day. Tens of millions of dollars have been spent, and numerous lawsuits involving the states of Colorado and New Mexico, as well as various other groups, continue to be fought. On May 5th, 2020, everything would change for Colorado and the whole world when the first recorded case of the COVID-19 pandemic hit its boundaries. Like most of the country, the state issued a lockdown which would last for well into May, and even then, the state remained under capacity limits and a mask mandate into May of 2021, when Democratic Governor Jared Polis ended the state of emergency with the newfound easy availability of the vaccines. Throughout the rest of 2021, Colorado saw a surge of cases with the Delta variant, and while local jurisdictions implemented their own mandates and capacity limits during that time, the governor refused to re-implement a statewide mask mandate, becoming one of the only Democratic governors in the country to take that position. By January of 2022, the worst of COVID was basically over, and everyone went back to normal. However, the state's economy is still suffering the effects of being closed for 2 years. During 2023, the economy grew slowly, with only 1,100 private sector jobs being added that year, and its inflation rate is still above the national average. Colorado is one of the most beautiful and economically diverse states in America, and one might argue even one of the most important, despite not having as large of a population as places like Texas or California. Throughout its history, millions have come to the state to explore opportunities in mining, agriculture, military, and many other jobs. There have been many tragedies and calamities throughout its story, but each and every time, the state has recovered and emerged stronger than before, and today it's one of the best places in America to live and visit, with 4 national and 42 state parks for you to explore. Colorado is one heck of a place, isn't it? You know, while it certainly is fun daydreaming over the state's past, today you can still visit the remnants of ancient Indian civilizations, abandoned mines, ghost towns, military outposts, railroads through the Rockies, and see the world for what it should be: raw, frozen, and beautiful. I'm Zane Lewis. Thanks for watching.